Into the Enchanted Forest, Book 1 of the Enchanted Forest series by Alicia J. Chumney. Chapter 8. Closing her eyes, Gabby lay there staring at what stars she could see while thinking instead of sleeping. She was falling in love with Ethan, and it scared her. It was a million little things, like the way he had stared at her writing notes in class, the many times he kept her from falling on her face over the logs that the forest put in her path. He was unlike any of the guys from when she was growing up. None of them would have held her hair back and whispered soothing words while she purged her stomach after the were-huntsman debacle. At night, she saw him scratching the top of Seafoam's head before the wormling fell asleep. It was amazing that the little dragon stayed with them after her wings were healed. It was even more amazing how Ethan had taken to her after his initial misgivings. There were only a few problems, and she suspected they were caused by the forest's attempts to get Gabby and Ethan closer together. She needed to be home, and the enchanted forest was keeping her lost. Gabby stared at where Jack, Ethan, Jack, was turning a carefully caught rabbit. They had made certain that it was a regular rabbit and not a talking rabbit over a fire. She was thinking, and all her thoughts wanted to tangle together into one massive knot. It was quite obvious that he liked her. Each morning found the pair snuggled closer than before next to the dying embers of the fire. Ethan's arm had her tucked securely into him as his back took on the vulnerable position of being turned towards the forest instead of the fire. They truly weren't worried. The were-huntsman had been Gabby's third and final quest in the Enchanted Forest, and yet they were no closer to Wonderland than they were to whatever was hidden in the center of the forest. It was there. It was waiting. Gabby began to doubt that what the forest was waiting for was because of her. When she was honest with herself, she would admit that she'd had a crush on Ethan at school. She'd been secretly thrilled the day he had sat next to her in class. She could barely borrow a pencil. She was relieved to see him standing behind her when she realized that she was no longer on her college campus and was in the Enchanted Forest instead. And now, after spending hours and weeks by his side as she learned about her new home and his life here, as they battled bridges and were-huntsmen, she knew she loved him. She knew it when Howard had locked Ethan in the cellar. She knew it when she had saved them. She knew it when he carried her out of the cottage and comforted her while she sobbed and retched in the clearing. That was the thing about fairy tales, and she was the product of more than just the Wonderland tradition. She knew her tales. A merchant's daughter could become a princess. The abused stepsister that ended up going to the ball and meeting a prince. A mermaid that longed to be a human. A goose girl. A mistreated third son. They could all become a princess or a prince if the story demanded it. Fairy tales were about hope and redemption. They were about warnings and dangers. A quester or an average person could gain riches or reptiles, all based on how they treated the elderly lady who was really a fairy or a fairy godmother in disguise. Anybody could defeat the hypothetical dragon that threatened their welfare or happiness. Gabby looked at Ethan, Jack, and knew that his side of the tale was the hope side of fairy tales. It was the hope that the youngest son could overcome obstacles and become more than his station in life. Jack, Ethan, Jack just did not see it. Jack? Yes, Princess? He was frustrated. The fire had refused to start, and it was taking him longer than usual for the kindling to catch the tiny flames he was creating. She took a breath before sharing her thoughts. Every trial is about testing my ability at ascending the throne and ruling a kingdom. Yes, Princess. The title was his reminder of who she was in relation to himself. The bridge was about analyzing situations and not doing something just because I could, especially when there are more important matters that need to be tackled. Even the thoughtful tone in her voice caught his attention. Jack watched Gabby as she stroked Seafoam's snout. He imagined that the dragon was warm when everything around them was cold. Seafoam was about analyzing threats. She wasn't a threat. It also tested my compassion. She was hurt and scared, and I helped her instead of jumping to conclusions and killing her. She stopped to think. The granny's cottage was about finding my way out of tough situations without any help. You were locked in the basement, root cellar, and unable to help. Seafoam couldn't get into the cottage, and if she did anything, it would have destroyed everybody in the cottage. It was me against the freakish wolf huntsman hybrid. That was scary. Would you call him a werewolf? It was pure luck that there was a silver knife still in that house. It was magic, Gabby. You have to get used to it. He slipped up and forgot to be careful with how he addressed her. Turning to face him, she grimaced. You've been calling me princess all night. That's what you are, he stated. Even though he refused to make eye contact with her, Gabby continued. Jack, Ethan, you aren't just a Jackson, you are also a huntsman. We have gone a week without a quest, and we are no closer to the castle, any castle, than when we began. If this was my quest, we would have encountered the next trial. I think this is one of yours. No, princess, he stood up in protest. He was her bodyguard, and he would risk his life to protect her. She stood there for a moment, not certain what to do. She wanted to stay with Ethan and try to reason with his logic. She could throw out fairy tale after fairy tale in support of her thoughts, but he might counter back with the version of events he had learned. Acknowledging that she was in a lose situation when it came to him, Gabby stood up and gathered her cloak tightly around her body. Then I need you to let me continue on this path alone. I cannot keep waiting for you to realize what I figured out at Granny's cottage. All of the signs were there from the moment I walked into the never-ending forest wearing a red cloak with a huntsman on my heels. If we weren't lying to each other, we would admit that what was there between us from the moment you sat down next if we weren't lying to each other, we would admit that what was there between us from the moment you sat down next to me in class. Gabby moved to stand in front of Jack before he could say anything. You may be called Jack, but you really are Ethan, and not Ethan the extra. You are still the fifth Jack that nobody, including yourself, knows what to do with. You don't even know why you became a huntsman. You said so yourself. Taking a deep breath, she said the most difficult part of her thoughts. So I'm going to ask you to let me go. This isn't just my quest, but it's your quest too. You need to find yourself and what you want and need. You need to figure out if you are going to be Jack the bodyguard or Ethan my friend and consort. Hopefully you'll find me at the castle when you know. She left without saying another word, just left Jack staring at the fire and where Seafoam was curled up asleep. She didn't want to leave the dragon behind, but she didn't want to wake her up either. It was likely the dragon's parents were looking for her and wouldn't think to check Wonderland. By noon, she was at the Wonderland Bridge.